we go. For loops, we're going to learn a new kind of loop. It's called a for loop. And we're going to learn how to print columns of information. All right. And it's not that big of a deal. So, so to start, here's an example, just two different while loops, kind of while loops we've been doing. See how the top one, while, x equals 1, and then while x is less than 5, print x equals x plus 1. That's a little loop that'll print the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the bottom example is a while true loop. So that's something we do when you want to loop until some specific thing happens, and then you have to have a break call somewhere in there, otherwise it'll just go forever. Okay, so a for loop is a little different. A for loop, you use a for loop when you know how many times you want to loop. So that's different from a while true, where you don't know how many times you're going to loop. A for loop, you're like, okay, I know I want to go 7 times. That's a great time to use a for loop. So a for loop has 3 parts. It has the word for in it. It has a variable you're going to put things into. And it has a place where the things are coming from. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's an example. I made a list variable and I put 3 foods into it: pizza, apples, bananas. And then this is an example of a for loop. It's easy. It says for x in foods, print x. And so what this does is it takes the things that are in the foods variable one at a time and puts them into x. And so it's going to loop, like there's 3 things in the list. It's going to loop 3 times. A for loop always has a colon on the end, kind of like our while loops had to have a colon on the end. So if you had a list of things and you knew you wanted to like process that list, you can use a for loop to do that. Process, like print or do something to it. Here's another example. For x in range 10. This one prints out the numbers 0 through 9, 1 on each line. And this is a new command. It's the range command. What that does is range, in effect, look down here, it creates this list that you don't get to see that starts at 0 and goes up to 1 less than the number that's in there. So those are the numbers that it's going to use for x, 1 at a time in the loop. So you don't ever see that list with the 0 through 9 in it, but that's like created in the background. So let's see. If you can also, with the range command, you can use 2 numbers. And if I wanted to print the numbers 13 through 19, I start at 13 and then I do 1 more than I want on the top end, because Python always does 1 less than the top number. Okay, so any questions about that? I mean, we'll be trying it in a minute, but I was thinking maybe I'll show a couple examples. So for x in range 10, print x. So if I run this, we're going to get 0 through 9, because this range call with a 10, it goes from 0 to 9. Let's do 5, 10 for the range command. So everyone try to think which numbers you think will show up there. You don't have to say, just think about it. So if you said 5 through 9, you're right, because it always does 1 less than the top number. Let's do a list. All right, so I made a list that has some clothes in it, and I'm gonna show you this 4x in my list. It's just gonna print out all the things in the list, one at a time. Check this out. You can also say 4x in just a word. Here's a piece of text, and it'll print out all the letters one at a time. So it takes the letters out of that piece of text one at a time, throws them into this x variable. So x doesn't have to be x. It could be some other variable. Okay. So the other part of today's new material that I wanted to talk about is how to print things in columns. So when I'm talking about columns, I'm talking about something like this, 1, 7, 14, 21, 28, like this is in 3 columns. That's instead of just printing them out in a long list. So sometimes when you have a bunch of information, it's nice to print it out in columns. So, normally when we do a print command, after it prints something we ask it to print, it goes to the next line, right? Well, this top line, this is an example of something we can do to make Python not go to the next line. We use this end command. Sorry, I clicked, so it went to the next slide. So instead of just saying print 1, if I wanted to have this column thing, I would say print 1, comma, and then I say end equals, and this symbol means tab, \T. I think we did that way back in the beginning. So so right here, if I said print 1, end equals tab, print 7, end equals tab, and then a print 14, oh, how funny. I just did this wrong. Let me fix that. Bothers me that it's wrong. Which line are we on? Right here. It prints a 1, 7, 14. Because that's the benefit of having a slide deck like this. If I make a mistake, I can fix it right away. So these 4 commands would print out this, where we get like the starting of some columns, tabs, line up information, instead of, if we just put a space between them, then they'd all be sort of wonky because different numbers are different width. Okay. The trick with printing in columns is that you do want every once in a while to put a regular print call without that tab thing. So it'll start on a new line. Because if you just did all your prints with this end equals, then you would just go on forever like this in one huge long, one huge long list. So before we do this program, let me go back to REPL. And I just want to show you. So if I did 4x in my list right here, if we added that end equals tab thing, let's see what happens. It's going to print the things in the list like out here, like this, going out like columns. And if we had range 10 here, I don't know what that was. We're going to get 0 through 9 printed out, like it just would go forever. But this is a start, right? Instead of going straight down, at least we're going across now. So now I'd like us to look at this program. See if you can figure out let's first say, what values are we going to see in X? So everyone look at this 4X in range 1, 33. So what's the smallest X we're going to get? And what's the biggest X we're going to get? Just want you to think for yourself. You don't have to say out loud. So I'll tell you this, the first X will be 1 and the last one will be 32. And then I want to ask you, what does this if line do? We've learned this already. Any thoughts on the if line?
If x modulo 4 equals 0,
So what does that do? Like, let's say x was 4. What happens?
it divides it, like sees what the remainder is.
Yeah, exactly. So this line, this if line, is taking whatever x is, dividing it by 4, and if there's ever no remainder, it prints a new line without the tab. So I'll show you what this does. Uh, uh, we'll do 1 comma 33, print x tab. If x modulo 4 is equal to 0, then we print, and I'm printing 1 at the end for good measure. So watch what happens. We get 4 columns, the numbers 1 to 32 in 4 columns. And what this is saying is, without this if line, it would just print them all forever. I could just, I'll cut that out and you'll see what I'm talking about. It just prints like this long column, basically not columns. It's just printing tabbed. I mean, it kind of looks like it's columns because it wraps around, but it's not columns. So when we put that if line in, what happens is we get these columns. What if I wanted 5 columns? We would change this 4 to a 5. Check it out. We'll have 5 columns. If I wanted 7 columns, we can change that to 7. So when we're printing in columns, you're always going to have some kind of if modulo statement, just because you have to do that to get it. You have to trigger off some sort of number. So let's go back here. Yeah, and here I showed you what it did, but I already showed you on the REPL. So here's another example. Text equals go Tigers. Yeah, this one's a little more complicated. So let's walk through it. It does print in 3 columns. It prints the letters from go Tigers in 3 columns. There's a space here, and it looks like nothing went there, but go space Tigers. And what's happening is it's saying for x in range, and right here we're saying the length of the text variable. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 letters in here. So it's getting the numbers 0 through 9. And then it's printing, first it's printing letter 0, which is G. Then it's printing letter 1, which is the O, and so on. And then it's doing this thing where it's printing a new line every third element. The reason we do the +1 is because if we don't, because we started it at 0, the modulo thing needs that. So I'll show you. Go Tigers, and 4x in range. We're going to say the length of text. That's this variable I just made. Print x. Let's see, and I'll just do this without doing that x plus 1, and you'll see it does a new line on the 0. Oh, I'm not printing x. I want to print text x. So now we're going to see the G, and then it goes to a new line because when you do 0 modulo 3, you get 0. So this is where sometimes you got to play around with the numbers here. But anyway, now we've got what I got on the slide. Anyway, I know it's complicated. I'm here to help. We're going to be fine. A final example. Sometimes you put a loop inside of a loop. So check this thing out. 4x in range 5, 8. That's going to give us 5, 6, 7, 3 numbers. X will be 5, then it'll be 6, then it'll be 7. And then we have inside of it, see, it's indented, 4y in range 2, 5. That'll give us the numbers 2, 3, 4. And it's printing x plus y, and it's doing a tab. But then every time the inside for loop finishes, it prints a blank line. So what it's doing, when x is 5, here's x, this first line is when x is 5. And first it's going to add 2. 5 plus 2 is 7. 5 plus 3 is 8. 5 plus 4 is 9. And then it goes to a new line. Now x is 6. And 6 plus 2 is 8. 6 plus 3 is 9. 6 plus 4 is 10. And so on. So one of our programs, one part of today's program, it involves doing a loop inside of a loop. So I think, yeah, that's it for the notes. Questions? Do you want to see another example? And I realize this is a lot to take in. So there's, we'll just get to it in a minute. So, but if anyone had a question. Okay, I'm going to stop the